Hello, everyone. Welcome to the new Center for Research and Practices seminar with Ray Brazier, Contemporary Readings of Hegel. This is the first session. I'm going to pass the mic and the camera to Ray to begin the class. Ray, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Mo. First of all, I hope everyone can hear me okay. Secondly, the connection here in Lebanon is, unreliable. There are power cuts. We should be okay for the next 2.5 hours because the power cuts, we've just missed one power cut now. So I'm hoping that the connection will remain stable. So first of all, I'd like to maybe just kind of ask if people wouldn't mind maybe just introducing themselves and letting me know whether or not how familiar they are with Hegel, whether they've studied Hegel before, or the degree of their interest in Hegel, and that will also help me kind of get to know you, remember your names as well. So. Would someone like to start, to volunteer?
I begin calling everyone's name because then they mute themselves, so everybody not unmute, right? So I begin from the left, and what I see on the screen as my left is different than everyone. So sorry about that. Aaron, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So hi, I'm Aaron Marcus. I am coming to you from Berlin this time. And my background is in sort of political science, political philosophy, and intellectual history. With some German. I've covered Hegel, not in depth, but certainly a background and some direct reading in college about 5 years ago, and more recently with Peter Wolfendale and Ben Woodard in a class. So
okay, excellent. Okay.
Christian, you're next.
I started reading. I've been reading philosophy for a few years now. I started with some anarchist and Marxist stuff like freshman and sophomore year of high school. I read Situationist, and then that got me onto Hegel, and I started reading some Hegel. And I really started reading some Hegel, and then Marcuse junior year of high school. Then I read the spring I read some Zizek, and over the summer I read some about Kant, and then I went through and I studied Deleuze a lot, and then I started reading more contemporary stuff. I feel like I'm pretty decently well versed on Hegel. He's someone who I reference a lot and I go back to continuously.
Okay, Avon, do you want to go next? We have difficulty hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, all right. Hi, I'm Avon. I'm actually in the middle of a sound check right now, so I might be darting in and out of this seminar, but I'm going to try to pay attention to it as much as I can. I'm really glad that to be here, to be part of it. But Hegel, so I'm just actually reading through the phenomenology on my own. I've never taken a class in it, but I have taken a seminar at New Center with Reza Negarestani last year and started reading Brandom. So I guess that's my angle. I'm particularly interested in philosophy of history. I've been meaning to get around to it. I've basically been meaning to get around to Hegel. It's one of those things. But phenomenology is very thrilling, and I'm enjoying it a lot. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what you have to say about it.
Thank you, Avon. Hunter, you're the next.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So yeah, I studied Hegel as an undergrad. I took a class on phenomenology of spirit, and I live in New York. I read the Zizek book on Hegel that's assigned in this a couple of years ago, and so I have a fair amount of familiarity. but not from the Brandom angle. I don't really know anything about like Philadelphia school philosophers.
Thank you. Kevin, do you want to speak a few words next?
Yeah, hey, so I'm Kevin. I'm in New York. Been a fan of the New Center for a while, especially the new rationalism stuff. But this is my first like real seminar, I guess. I had the kind of like the 101 on Hegel. You know, I read the preface and the introduction. Yeah, I'm really excited to, I've been studying Whitehead recently, and I'm really excited to see how they compare. So yeah, look forward to this class.
Thank you.
Great.
Maria, you're next.
Hi. So my name is Maria. I'm also in New York, and I'm an artist. I have a pretty basic understanding of Hegel, but like other people, like I've been meaning to get around it, especially as like kind of studying systems of philosophy that are like different than the post-structuralists, and especially Deleuze, which has been my thing that I've been most dedicated to the past years. And so I'm really excited about really getting at it from your angle.
Thank you. Mika, you're next. If you want to turn your camera on, that would be lovely too, but it's not obligatory.
Can you hear me right now?
Yes, we can hear you.
I actually will not have video today because my camera's on my laptop, but
no problem.
Okay. So yeah, I took the seminar, I mean, most recently a year ago on the philosophy of system with Ben Woodard and Peter Wolfendale. But I mean, I've also been in, I mean, not Hegel directly, but I've been in seminars strictly dedicated to Spinoza and Kant, actually, and I've read a lot of like background on Lessing and a lot of the other writers that sort of led up to the German idealist moment or whatever. But I've never actually spent time dedicated to Hegel, even though I've read quite a bit of like the Science of Logic, Phenomenology of Spirit, the Encyclopedia, and a lot of the secondary literature. But yeah, I'm Mike. I live in Philadelphia. How's it going?
Very good, thanks. Okay, next is Oliver. Oliver, do you want to speak a few words about your familiarity with Hegel?
Or unfamiliarity. Yeah, I've tried understanding Hegel. I've spent a lot of time reading through texts and really haven't, well, I can hardly describe anything of Hegel's thought apart from the philosophy of history. So I'm open to and very keen on learning a lot about Hegel in this course.
Theodore, you're the last.
Hi, I'm Theodore, and yeah, I'm sort of going through phenomenology of spirit right now, my own. So I'll be excited to hear more. I'm pretty new to his thought, I think. I'm reading the Beiser book on German idealism, the struggle against subjectivism.
Okay, thank you. So just before Craig starts, I just want to say that I sent everyone an email that includes a handout for today. And also I want to tell everybody that we updated the syllabus, and the syllabus now has all the weekly readings there. And as we move along, I will be adding the PDFs and the links to the onlines there. And some of them, the links are already on the reading, so you don't need me to add them. So just follow through that area in the classroom. And for the Google Classroom, most of you are already on it. Some of you have not accepted my invitation. So please accept the invitation and join the Google Classroom, because the material is going to be there. And the first email I sent out today had the link to the Google Classroom and the code you need to log in. But remember, for this session, like these Hangouts, you can come in with your regular Google account. Anyone with the link, as long as they're logged into Google, can attend the class. But for the classroom, you have to be logged into your New Center email. So so maybe sometimes it's just easier to be logged into the New Center email for both, because if you have to go between the two of them during the class, it's going to be hard for you to manage that. So maybe you want to, like, if you're planning to go to the classroom, please log into the log into the News Center email so you can go back and forth between the two without needing to like log out of one and log into the other one. I don't have any other extra notes, so I say let's, and I myself, because I would like to have a little bit of an active role in a class like you guys as a student, I want to consider myself also a student, but my knowledge of Hegel is probably less than all of you guys. So, but you know, don't worry about me, Ray. You can adjust the level of discourse to what you heard from the others, not me. I will catch up. So yeah, so here you are. This is the first lecture. Go ahead, Ray.
Okay, right, well, okay, so first of all, I'll just try to quickly go over the syllabus for the course, which I hope everyone has. So this is really, what I'm offering is a compressed version of what was actually originally designed as a 14-week course. So there's been a lot of compression, which unfortunately means that, you know, I'll be trying to go through a lot of material in a short span of time. The Hegel readings will all be from Stephen Houlgate's Hegel Reader, which I believe Mo has made available as a PDF. And the syllabus specifies which texts of Hegel's we'll be looking at on specific weeks. But then obviously we're also going to be focusing on some contemporary, contemporary interpretations of Hegel. Most importantly, those by Robert Pippin and Robert Brandom, on the one hand, and those represented in the continental tradition by three thinkers in particular: Rebecca Comey, Mladen Dolar, and Slavoj Žižek. And the reason for this very selective circumscription of the vast, from among the vast contemporary literature on Hegel, is because I think these, in the, if one compares and contrasts the Pippin-Brandom reading with the Comey-Dolar-Žižek reading, there's a really kind of startling antagonism vis-a-vis the understanding of Hegel's contemporary relevance, but also vis-a-vis the possibilities of rationality and the understanding of philosophy's relationship to history and to the 20th century history in particular. So the course is an attempt. So basically, in a way, that the title of the course is an attempt to activate Hegel's thinking rather than simply try to engage in a kind of a purely exegetical reconstruction. And because Hegel is the thinker who most famously insists that philosophy is conditioned by its own time, and that philosophical conceptualization is internally conditioned by contemporary socio-historical conjunctures, it seems to me that it's impossible to abstract an interpretation of Hegel, or an attempt to make sense of Hegel today from the ways in which his thinking is taken to either be anachronistic or of absolutely decisive contemporary urgency. And this is, Hegel's thinking can be considered anachronistic if one considers him to be the consummation of a metaphysical tradition that has been allegedly deconstructed in the 20th century by Heidegger and his acolytes, but also criticized in the analytic tradition. So if one of the things that's at stake here is trying to see if a non-metaphysical reading of Hegel is possible, but not only possible, but actually necessary. And interestingly, both factions of Hegel interpreters that we'll be examining, they both insist that Hegel is not the metaphysician of absolute spirits, which he was taken to be at the end of the 19th century and early 20th century. So in a way, so one of the things we need to kind of, or one of the wagers of the seminar will be to try to make sense of Hegel in non-metaphysically, without these traditional, independently of a traditional metaphysical framework, in which metaphysics is defined as the a priori knowledge of substance, and substance, the paradigm for what substance is delivered by Aristotle. Substance is what truly is. Substance is what is in and by itself. Both, all the thinkers will be, the Hegelian interpreters will be looking at, think that Hegel has successfully superseded this Aristotelian metaphysical tradition, but they draw radically divergent consequences from this allegedly successful overcoming or supersession. And this is, and I think in trying to identify the precise contours of the antagonism, or in Hegelian terms, the kind of the nature of the contradiction, I think something really, Hegel's decisive contemporary relevance can be exposed. In other words, Hegel is a thinker who insists that all thinking proceeds by way of, antagonistic contradiction, so that the contradiction about the meaning of his actuality for us today is the key to understanding, is the key to making sense of Hegel now. So that's the interpretative gambit. I also think this is also connected to the claim, which I hope we'll try to make sense of, that Hegel is the thinker who introduces time into thinking. Part of what Hegel does is famous. Hegel is famous, for allegedly introducing obligating philosophy to become self-consciously historical, to become self-conscious about its own historicity. But Hegel is not simply a historicist, because Hegel thinks that history is intelligible. History has an intelligible structure. And this, of course, is one of the most notorious claims of Hegelianism, and one of the reasons for which it was, frequently lambasted. The suggestion that there is that history is animated by some kind of teleology, and that the unfolding of time is teleologically structured. And so already we see, and given that teleology is another, the insistence that substance is teleological, substance, the being of substance is necessarily purposeful, Hegel's overcoming, or alleged overcoming, of Aristotelianism needs to be understood along with a transformation of the notion of purpose, or telos. And this is, I think, the other kind of crucial, parameter in the debate over his contemporary relevance. Whether it's possible to jettison Aristotelian essentialism and yet still retain a notion of rational purposiveness. Okay, because Hegel does insist that a purpose can be retrospectively discerned in history, and it's the nature of this retrospective discernment, which is which is debated about by the interpreters we're going to be examining. I mean, to be blunt, or to be kind of very schematic, on the one hand, we have a reading where the Pippin-Brandom reading, where it's always possible the resources of rationality advance by making sense of retrospectively making sense or rationally justifying what seem to be historical contingencies, accidents. And on the other hand, you have this alternative reading which says that Hegel is a thinker of trauma in some sense. That the way to understand Hegel is in terms of the working through of trauma, which is why obviously Comé, Dollard, and Zizek are fundamentally inspired by psychoanalysis, and they try to interpret Hegel through this psychoanalytic prism, which is for which the claim that reason could also somehow successfully integrate these historical catastrophes or these eruptions of unreason is a fantasy, some kind of unfortunate delusion. So I think that what I hope is that although we're going to be looking at trying to focus on the kind of the crux of Hegel's speculative machinery, I think the stakes are quite high in terms of understanding of the implications of a proper understanding of Hegel's conceptual armature. So just to go quickly glance at the syllabus.
I can put it on my screen up, and so we have the actual syllabus on the screen. Do you want the reading side or your text?
The reading side. The reading side. Yes, the one thinker who I haven't mentioned, who we're also looking at, is of course Adorno. Adorno, who is arguably a thinker who draws inspiration from Hegel, but is also in a way formulates the kind of the canonical objection to Hegelianism as simply being a kind of a theodicy. Which is simply no longer viable after the catastrophes of the 20th century. We'll also be, in week 7, we will be looking at Adorno's critique of Hegel. And interestingly, where it overlaps, but also where it diverges from the readings proposed by Comé, Dollard, and Zizek. Okay, well, are there any questions about the syllabus or about the readings?
So if you have a question, unmute yourself and ask the question. But please be brief because we want to save the time for discussion and for the lecture.
So yeah, two short questions from me. The first is with regard to these kind of groupings of the readers. Would you suggest, I mean, it seems kind of obvious to divide them into continental and analytic. Could you think of like a better way of categorizing them or like naming these?
Well, although they both Well, what's interesting about, I guess, Pippin and Brandom is, so Robert Pippin's book, we're really going to be, for the first few weeks, focusing a lot on Robert Pippin's interpretation. And Pippin's book, 1989 book, Hegel's Idealism, was, in a way, I think a decisive inspiration for Brandom, but is the, proposed this, a non-metaphysical reading of Hegel that would, that made, in a way, that kind of made Hegel intelligible for philosophers reared in the analytic tradition. Pippin himself, although he's a scholar of German idealism, but he certainly wouldn't describe himself as an analytic philosopher. And of course, Hegel is, paradigmatically anti-analytic philosopher. He's a speculative philosopher. And to understand what Hegel means by speculation is also, Hegel's notion of speculation is this kind of preemptive critique of analytic philosophy in terms of the priority of analysis and argument. Brandom, even more interestingly, so Brandom is a philosopher whose work is, categorized as belonging to the kind of the analytic canon, but actually his position within that tradition is controversial. First of all, Brandom is a systematic philosopher who's developed, famously kind of inferentialism and analytic pragmatism in between saying and doing. And his own conception of his philosophical projects is basically, I think, hangs to the analytic tradition by the slenderest of threads, which is why he is, he's viewed with considerable disdain by by analytic metaphysicians and more orthodox, proponents of the analytic ideal. So, if you look at figures like, Timothy Williamson who's a very influential contemporary analytic philosopher, and someone who, in his own work, in his book, The Philosophy of Philosophy, defends the analytic ideal. He thinks it needs to be corrected, but he thinks it needs to be radicalized in terms of achieving a greater degree of mathematical precision in the formulation of arguments. And he takes a very dim view of Brandom's work. If he wrote a review of Brandom's Reason in Philosophy, which is, if not scathing, certainly very unfriendly. So I actually think that the Pippin and Brandom don't really qualify as analytic philosophers, and what they're trying to do is difficult to kind of to reconcile with the analytic self-conception. As for the Adorno, Comé, Dolar, and Zizek are, yes, I guess they would count as continental philosophers, but continental philosophy is also has a very kind of antagonistic relationship to Hegel, and all the kind of the key developments in 20th century continental philosophy were anti-Hegelian. Adorno is, he's, in his work, I think his criticisms of Hegel are rhetorical and actually unconvincing, but he sees Hegel as something, as representing a conception of philosophy which is simply kind of which has lapsed, which is simply indefensible and probably pernicious Dolar and Zizek self-identify as Hegelians, but obviously their interpretation of Hegel is filtered through the work of Jacques Lacan. So they have a very eccentric, or rather they kind of represent a very eccentric position vis-a-vis what could be called mainstream continental philosophy. And what's interesting is that they defend Hegel against the attacks made on him, and specifically against the attacks made on him by the post-structuralists on the one hand, but also by figures like Adorno. So I think that's a very interesting stance. However, it's not clear, because of the psychoanalytic inspiration, it's not clear that they're interested in salvaging Hegel's commitment to the powers of rationality, the powers of conceptualization. And this is something I think we'll need to examine when we come to discuss their work. In other words, that they're Hegelians, but they're Hegelians who are not interested in, science, or what Hegel called Wissenschaft, the possibility of a speculative science of actuality. So this is also, so in a way, although these Lacanian Hegelians are very scathing about the allegedly deflationary reading of Hegel proposed by Pippin and Brandom, they themselves propose a deflationary reading, but it's a deflationary reading of another kind. And I think understanding in what sense they too, despite their protestations, are engaged in a conjunctural deflation of Hegel is important. So what I propose to do, because already time's moving on, is okay. I'd like to kind of maybe look at the first handouts. If Mo, if you could perhaps put it up on the screen.
Yes, just you can continue talking. I'll put it up in 1 second.
Sure, thanks. So now in this, so unfortunately we haven't had time to kind of, well, I take it most of you won't have had time to kind of look at Pippin's book, but I really, Pippin's book is going to be our starting point in a way, because I think it's the best place to get a grip on this claim that Hegel is not simply a metaphysician. He's not Aristotle after Kant, as he is sometimes accused of being. He is, in fact, on Pippin's reading, a radical Kantian. He's someone who accepts Kant's critique of dogmatic metaphysics, but someone who thinks that there are dogmatic residues within Kantian critique, so that Hegel wants to push critique even further to the point where it becomes speculation. And so the first handout consists of some quotes from Hegel. Some of these quotes, the first four are from texts that, well, the first four are from the Encyclopedia Logic, but also from the text known as the Berlin Phenomenology, which is an early version of the, not an early version, but a series of lecture courses on the philosophy of mind that Hegel gave at in Berlin when he's a professor. And these, so these quotes are there to help us make our way into the preface, to try to kind of make some sense of some of the, the startling things that Hegel says in the preface, where he uses this vocabulary, which it is all too easy to simply interpret metaphysically. I mean, in a way that the terms he uses invite a metaphysical interpretation. So the challenge is to try to make sense of them non-metaphysically. Now, Pippin insists that Hegel's speculative supersession of Kant is rooted in his radicalization of the principle of apperception, what Kant called the transcendental unity of apperception. So this is the first quote on the handouts. Now, it's important to remember what Kant means by the transcendental unity of apperception. So Kant says that the I think, which must accompany all my representations, is the ultimate synthesizing principle, which guarantees the unity of possible experience. When Hegel uses the word I, or self-consciousness, and when I and self-consciousness are roughly equivalent in this context, he is using this term, these expressions have a straightforwardly Kantian provenance. This is coming directly from Kant. And of course, the most important thing to understand about Kant's conception of apperception is that apperception is a transcendental function and not the self-relation of some kind of mental substance. So the principle of apperception in Kant is the destitution of Cartesian substantialism. It's also that which, in a way, rescinds the Cartesian claim about the transparency of consciousness, or the mind's transparency to itself. Because Kant will famously insist that on the absolute difference between the transcendental I and transcendental apperception and empirical apperception, so that empirical apperception, which is the sense in which we apperceives ourselves experiencing, for Kant is a perfectly objective phenomenon. It's something that is part of the domain of experience. It's an object of possible experience, and therefore it is always conditioned by pure apperception. So the self-consciousness that Kant sees working in pure apperception is not a kind of empirical self-consciousness or psychological reflexivity, and it's very, very important to keep emphasizing this. Otherwise, the whole, one's understanding of, Kant and Hegel in particular will be, I think, goes very badly wrong from the beginning. So, for instance, the first quote here is, "The word I expresses the abstract relation to self, and whatever is placed in this unit or focus is affected by it and transformed into it. The I is, as it were, the crucible and the fire which consumes the loose plurality of sense and reduces it to unity. The tendency of all of man's endeavors is to understand the world, to appropriate and subdue it to himself. And to this end, the positive reality of the world must be, as it were, crushed and pounded. In other words, idealized." So this is an emblematic quotation, because first of all, it says that the I expresses an abstract relation to itself. So for pure apperception is a self-relation. So we need to kind of try to understand what this means. Well, the basic idea is that in the for Kant, pure apperception is the synthesizing agent which binds the subject and the predicate of judgment. This synthetic binding, which is the core of judgment, is what constitutes experience. So experience is propositionally structured because it is constituted through judgment, through the synthetic a priori. And it is apperception that affects the a priori synthesis of the subject and the predicate in the judgment. Now, what else is happening in synthesis? Well, famously, every judgment is a synthesis of concept and intuition. And the concept is a function of the understanding, whereas the sensible manifold is received from sensibility. So that, the two Kantian faculties, understanding and sensibility. Kant insists that concepts without intuitions are empty. So he thinks that in order for a concept to have objective purport, in order for it to be about something in the world, and in order for a conceptual characterization to be to truly characterize the way the world is, it must be combined with an intuition, or it must have been synthesized with an intuition. But the intuition is, in a way, this source of exteriority. It's intuition is that aspect of the mind through which the mind is conditioned by what is external to it. So the first move, now all of Kant's critics, but Fichte, Fichte and Schelling in particular, in a way begin by questioning the dualism of concept, what they take to be the dualism of concept and intuition in Kant, which is also the distinction between understanding and sensibility. And already in the B edition of the First Critique, we see in the famous, the rewriting of the Transcendental Deduction, we see Kant emphasizing we see Kant making this, in a way, recalibrating the relationship between understanding and sensibility. In the first version, in the 1781 edition, he appealed to what he called the transcendental imagination as the mediator between understanding and sensibility. So the understanding imagination was, the transcendental imagination was postulated as this this hidden power, which ultimately bound concepts and intuitions together, and it had this role as this go-between for understanding and sensibility. In the B edition, Kant famously subordinates the imagination to the understanding. He seems to argue the imagination is nothing but a lieutenant of the understanding, and so that's apperceptive synthesis is already at work in what Kant calls formal intuition, so that the unity of the manifold of intuition, the sensible manifold, is already guaranteed by pure apperception. So he's extending the grip of the understanding and also reason, insofar as reason is subordinate, insofar as reason governs the operations of the understanding, into sensibility. And this is for Hegel, this is a kind of an absolutely decisive move, because it means that if the concept is already at work in the sensible manifold, it means that the mind consciousness is not, or subjectivity is not affected by something that is wholly exterior to it. Consciousness is a kind of self-affection. So consciousness, in a way, relates to itself through the sensible manifold, by, in a way, by kind of receiving or apprehending the sensible manifold. And this is already, this attenuation of the sharp contrast between the receptivity of sense and the spontaneity of the understanding implies that, in a way, that spontaneity and receptivity are simply aspects of a single fundamental phenomenon. And Hegel grasps onto this. So Hegel, in a way, says that is seizing upon this Kantian insight and pushing itself further through Fichte. Unfortunately, we won't have time to discuss Fichte here, but Pippin has a very interesting, very illuminating discussion of Fichte's role in helping Hegel arrive at his own position. I'm sorry, I need to stop for a minute. So.
No problem. Just maybe decompress a little bit and we can go back to Ray when he comes back. If anybody has any comments, go ahead. It's better than that, and have
Wait, which section of the Critique of Pure Reason did he say was the one that Kant revised?
Oh, the preface. Malibu actually has a really good lecture on it, and I've actually been taking notes. The transcendental imagination is like a mediator between sensibility and thought. But the important thing that differentiates Hegel from Kant is, whereas Kant holds apart the duality of sensibility and thought, Hegel conjoins them in a single positive. So whereas Kant sort of shirks away from the imagination in favor of sort of like a cognitive application, Hegel emphasizes the revelatory aspect of imagination, where it reveals the structural necessity that posits its conditions.
Thank you, Christian. We made this agreement, like Ray said, that there might be a moment that he needs to step away from the computer. So this is why we have this interruption. So if anybody else wants to just talk.
Okay, I'm back. I'm sorry.
Back. No problem.
Yes, sorry about that.
If you want to turn your camera on, that would be lovely.
Yes.
Okay, here we are.
So I'm sorry, but if anyone wants, I should have said, if anyone wants to make a comment, please feel free to interrupt.
You missed
for clarification.
You missed Christian's brilliant comment, but it will be too much to ask him to repeat it. But maybe if others want to make a comment, go ahead. And if not, we can continue on and wait for later.
Okay, so yes, let me. So basically, the basic idea is very simple. It's that the understanding is already at work in intuition, so that you have a kind of conceptual intuition. So that the way in which the manifold is synthesized is already conceptual. That's the basic idea. And because the I for the I think, which must accompany all my representations, is this pure apperception. Hegel, when Hegel talks about the I in his work, and especially in the phenomenology, he means transcendental apperception. So this is what I think. This is how we are to understand the claim that the word I expresses an abstract relation to self. Why? Because I is, in a way, the synthesizing power, which, in a way, has to, in a way, estrange itself, or has to externalize itself in order to relate back to itself. And what in Kant's schema, this is very simply the relationship between, Kant calls a transcendental unity of apperception the objective unity of apperception, because in a way it yields the objectivity of the object as well subjectivity of the subject. And in a way, all the idealists, all of Kant's successors fix upon this kind of this insight.
If you want the notes, I can put them up again.
It's okay. No, I have them here again. So this is why. So if we look at the second quote on, just to comment on the again on this the first quotation. So this is the sense in which the I is the crucible and the fire which consumes a loose plurality of sense and reduces it to unity. So in other words, the sensible manifold is conceptually integrated by the I. The most important thing here is that this I is not a substance. This I is not a thinking thing. Kant's famous characterization of pure apperception is that the I, or he, or she, or it, the thing that thinks, is not an object of possible experience for Kant. And it's not something that we can become aware of, because all our awareness is conditioned by this abstract self-relation. So the thing that thinks, the true nature of the thing that thinks, is something that is unknown for us. Whether it's forever unknown, or whether it can be somehow made into, whether it is cognizable, is a complicated issue in Kant himself, in terms of the issue about relationship between theoretical reason and practical reason. But it's because this I is merely an abstract self-relation that it has no substantial identity, so it has no essence. This is why pure apperception, or the I, as this abstract self-relation, is not a thinking substance. So, in a way, this is why this is explicitly anti-Cartesian concept. This is not a kind of subjectivism, at least as that word is ordinarily understood post-Descartes. And when Hegel writes that the tendency of all of man's endeavors is to understand the world and to appropriate and subdue it to himself, the reality of the world must be, as it were, crushed and pounded. He means that insofar as this abstract self-relation is at work, is the condition of experience. It's the condition for the unity of the world in which we think and act. So this is why it's the world has no substantial positive reality. When Hegel says the world has no positive reality, by positive he means it doesn't have the reality of a self-standing substance, of something that is in and through itself. Its reality, it acquires positivity after having been conditioned by this self-relating negativity. What he means when he says it must be, as it were, crushed and pounded. In other words, idealized. So the idealization of the world is a condition of actuality. The idealization of the world is a condition for its actuality, where actuality is Hegel's technical term for reality. And this is a term that is, again, has to be understood in a non-Aristotelian register. Because Hegel's actuality is not the actuality towards which all substantial becoming tends for Aristotle. Okay. Any remarks or
Ray, there's a question on the sidebar. That says, can you try to explain pure apperception in terms of rules? And that's Aaron. And maybe if you don't understand it properly or you have problem with it, maybe Aaron can re-explain this.
Well, actually, I do think I understand, and it's something that Pippin actually emphasized. I mean, the point. Okay, what is the when Kant contrasts the spontaneity of apperception with the receptivity of sense? What is spontaneity means? Well, transcendental spontaneity is precisely is rule governance. It's the ability to bind oneself to a rule, and the contrast is between the rule-governed nature of apperceptive spontaneity, which unifies the manifold under a concept, and the causal regularities which unfold in nature. So that the contrast is between rules and causes. Apperception is spontaneous insofar as it is rule governed, whereas sense is receptive insofar as it is causally, insofar as it involves the kind of causal efficacy, something causing, affecting our nervous systems in a certain way. So what Hegel is doing is taking this this contrast, the claim that apperceptive spontaneity is always is rule governed, and in fact is the deployment of a rule, and concepts for Kant are just rules for combining representations. This he thinks that this rulish spontaneity, which is a characteristic of rationality, of sapience as opposed to sentience, is itself in a way embedded, okay, in a kind of, in what he will call a shape of spirit. So what Hegel is doing, all this hopefully will become a bit, it's very schematic right now, but what Hegel is doing to Kant famously is Hegel is re-embedding transcendental apperception in a historical and cultural context. But he's not simply effecting a kind of empirical historicization. And understanding why he's not doing that is, I think, crucial to understanding Hegel. So Brandam's the phrase that Brandam is very fond of is that transcendental constitution becomes social institution. What Kant took to be the rule governs spontaneity, which was the condition for all experience and experienceability of an objective world in Kant, becomes itself embedded in a world understood as a kind of socio-historical context. But this embedding, this re-embedding of apperceptive spontaneity is not an empirical reduction. And understanding why it's not is, again, this is another sense in which Hegel has to remain faithful to Kant. In other words, there's two ways of relapsing, of defaulting on Kantian critique. One, obviously, is by resubstantializing what Kant had painstakingly desubstantialized, which is to say, the I, which is both the self and the object. But the other way is through regress and a kind of the way of skeptical empiricism, an attempt to collapse apperceptive spontaneity back into merely association or habits or convention. And in a way, the historicist reading of Hegel simply, does this. It's just another version. Historicism is a kind of empiricism, and it just takes the cultural, historically circumscribed cultural life form as its basic empirical units. But this is empiricism. So it's absolutely decisive to see that this is not what Hegel is doing. That Hegel's historicization of subjectivity or apperceptive spontaneity is precisely not a kind of historicism. Does that address the question you were asking?
Yeah, I believe it does. I think in terms of by asking, I was sort of asking for this Brandomian version of, I guess thinking of it as like a functional schematic of thinking, of like the rule govern activity of thinking, and Hegel kind of, if I understood you correctly, is taking this and placing this into sort of a social context, as opposed to Kant, who's more thinking of this as the rules that govern individual thinking, whereas Hegel thinks of it as a system of rationality that's produced by multiple.
Yes, but we have to be careful here.
You're having a difficulty, Aaron. You might want to repeat the last few phrases you said.
Sure, yeah, just to repeat, I was kind of trying to restate what Ray had just said, and thinking of the comparison of Kant as phrasing the I as a term of the systems of rules that govern thought and the relations of the mind to the self, whereas Hegel thinking of this as an activity taking place between multiple agents and the rules that govern rational exchange between them.
Yes, but however, there's a crucial, I think, clarification that has to be made. Is already I think it's an error to accuse Kant, to say that for Kant, apperception is the individual. I think he explicitly says it isn't. He says the thing that thinks is the same in all of us. It's the I or he or she or it, the thing that thinks is the same. So it's impersonal, and it's already intersubjective. So it's a mistake. Whatever Hegel's advance over Kant is, it's not introducing intersubjectivity. Intersubjectivity is already there in Kant's conception of pure apperception. And so the claim that Hegel is socializing what was still too kind of individualistic in Kant, I think is a complete misreading. And again, it's a kind of it's a kind of a really serious misreading of precisely, of Hegel's radicality, precisely because it underestimates Kant's radicality. So what Hegel is doing when he, in a way, re-embeds apperceptive spontaneity in a shape of Geist, what he calls a shape of spirit, part of what the difficulty in understanding Hegel is that this is not what a shape of spirit, the historicity, the historical coordinates in terms of which one could identify a shape of spirit are precisely not given. They're not empirically detectable, which is why it's a mistake to read the phenomenology as a kind of straightforward, as a narrative in any kind of, not only in an empirical sense, but in any kind of chronological sense. What, in a way, the part of Hegel's point is that the historicity of spirit is only perceptible for spirit itself in a more radical form of self-relation. And this is very important for understanding the phenomenology in terms of, as a science of the experience of consciousness. Consciousness is both the subject and the object of the phenomenology. It's both the subject matter, the phenomenon that is under investigation, but it's also the cognizing agent. And I think this, I'm trying to kind of get to grips with this, which we'll do next week when we look at the introduction. We'll see how, in a way, there's a second and third order spontaneity at work in speculative thinking, in Hegel's own speculative thinking, because the connections, the historical, because the structure of history, the logic that Hegel thinks is discernible in history, is precisely not an empirical datum. Something that can simply be kind of registered. So I think that, and I think on this point in particular, there's a lot of, again, there's a vulgarized Hegelianism, which simply always insists this mantra that, Hegel historicizes Kant. What exactly would that mean? What does it mean? What is historicity? As if the, historical indexing could be somehow with some kind of straightforward operation that could be carried out, given all of Kant's. That would just be another kind of dogmatism, or gratuitous skepticism. So I think it's really important to insist that this is not what's engaged in. Okay, right. Let's see if we can maybe move on a little bit more through the handouts. So this is why. So I'm going to try to move a little bit quicker now. So this is why Hegel writes, there can be no consciousness without self-consciousness. I know something, and that about which I know something, I have in the certainty of myself. Otherwise, I would know nothing of it. The object is my object, it is other and at the same time mine. And then in this latter aspect, I am self-relating. Again, the crucial thing when reading passages like this is to understand that the I here is not an empirical or a phenomenological I in a Husserlian sense. This is the I of pure apperception. It's not a thinking substance. And the object, by the same token, is not an extended substance or some kind of material substance. So if then we go into the third quotation, number 3, as this self-certainty with regard to the object, the the interjections are by Robert Pippin, because this is a quote selected from Pippin. Pippin writes, "The implicit self-relation wherein I take myself to be intending this in such a way, abstract self-consciousness therefore constitutes the drive to posit what is implicitly an sich, i.e. to give content and objectivity to the abstract knowledge of itself, and conversely to free itself from its sensuousness, to sublate the given objectivity and to posit the identity of this objectivity with itself." And Pippin interjects, that is, to understand none of the fundamental ways in which I take myself to experience the world as empirical or sensuous, and yet still to understand their objectivity, that they are not just my way or my species way of taking things to be. Now, what's important here is that this the self-certainty with regard to the object. Self-certainty, again, this is an expression that invites a kind of Cartesian misunderstanding. It's not about self-certainty, it's about justification. It's about what is apperceptive consciousness for Kant. It's the ability to justify any assertion or any judgment one makes about the way the world is, things being thus and so. And Kant's point is that to be a cognizer, to be a rational agent, is precisely to be able to, when challenged, to give a reason for one's assertions, to be able to justify one's judgments, they be empirical or a priori. So self-certainty here has to be understood in terms of the capacity for justification, the capacity to play the game of giving and asking for reasons. And this means that anytime in perceiving any object, in taking anything to be thus and so, I must also apperceive myself as taking it to be thus and so. And this simply means that I must be able in principle to identify the rule which governs this apperceptive synthesis. So this is what it means to relate, the implicit self-relation, which is, which underwrites my relation, the relation to other, is this the ability for rational justification, the ability to deploy concepts and assertions to justify any judgment that one makes about the way the world is. And this means, and of course, this apperceptive synthesis is precisely what is never empirically or sensibly conditioned for Kant. It's because of the distinction between reasons and causes. To deploy a concept in accordance with a rule is precisely to engage in apperceptive spontaneity in a way which can never be identified with an empirical causation, an empirical mechanism. This is the so what's striking, these are straightforwardly kind of Kantian kind of claims on Hegel's part. Here he's kind of radicalizing Kant, but the Kantian provenance is still very clear. And finally, quote number 4. The I is now this subjectivity, this infinite relation to itself. But therein, namely in this subjectivity, lies its negative relation to itself, diremption, differentiation, judgment. The I judges, and this constitutes it as consciousness. It repels itself from itself, and this is a logical determination. I think this is a very, illuminating passage. So already because it's presaging the terminology of the phenomenology here. The I now is subjectivity, but subjectivity as in a post-Kantian sense, subjectivity as something which is a self-relation, which is not a kind of substantial reflexivity. It's not the self-relation that consciousness allegedly has in the Cartesian tradition. But it's now an infinite self-relation. We're not quite, I think we're not yet ready to understand what Hegel means by infinite self-relation. But that, hopefully, again, that will become clearer as we proceed. But now he introduces this term, negativity. So the I is now this subjectivity, this infinite relation to itself. But this self-relation is a negative self-relation. It's a negative relation to self. And he calls it, and what's striking here is that he identifies it with judgment. So the I's negative self-relation is, in a way, kind of expressed in the form of judgment. And what is judgment? It's the subject-predicate judgment. Because judgment judgment involves a kind of splitting between the subject and the predicate, but a splitting which also kind of recombines them. That semantic resonance is explicit in the German Urteilt. So what? And again, this is a if one thinks of Kant, in a way, the I of pure apperception underwrites all judgment. And what is judgment? Judgment is synthetic a priori. So judgment is the combination of a subject term and a predicate term as prior to any sensuous determination. And this a priori synthesis of the subject and the predicate is what yields the object of experience, and ultimately a world, a unified world of experience. So the link between subjectivity, negativity, and judgment is, I think, absolutely crucial for understanding Hegel, and especially what Hegel says about his own project in the preface of Phenomenology. So he's saying that the I judges, so it's the agent of synthetic judgment, and this constitutes it as consciousness. In other words, it's through the activity, the spontaneous determination of judgment, that the I is conscious not only of itself but of the world. So what Hegel is suggesting here is that there's a kind of there's a logical determination that underwrites the self-relation that yields empirical experience. And by empirical experience, he means subjective awareness in the kind of the non-philosophical sense, as well as awareness of things being thus and so in the world. Okay, any questions? Anyone?
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay, just let's take some let's order it. Because Christian posted a question first, let's go for Christian first, and then maybe Kevin, and then then Hunter, and then Kevin. Okay, Christian, go ahead, but please be brief, because it's good to save the time for explanation.
It's not really a question, but I just feel obliged to say it. with as far as like judgment goes, it simultaneously is a disjunction of the abstract universal determinations and a conjunction in the self-relating negativity. So it's like what it does is it posits Luz is actually really useful here because it's the positive determinations end up going into disjunction, or for him it's the exterior necessity implies itself in the positive presence, but then you jump to, you know, synthesis from disjunction, where instead of, you know, predicates are implied by an external necessity, the external necessity itself reveals itself in the conjunction of the positive predicates.
Okay, that's, I think I follow. And you mentioned, so you're referring to Deleuze's account of disjunctive synthesis here. I take it. Yes.
It's like, yeah, because conjunction, I think, is the self-same negativity. It's consumption. It's the it's exteriority revealing itself in presence.
Yes. Basically, yes. That's exactly what's going on here.
Okay. Do you want? Let's move to Hunter. And Ray, I don't know if you can turn a light on, because it was really actually
yes.
kind of like beautiful that the change of light was announced through the Islamic call to prayer in the background of what you were talking about, and then we kind of saw the light kind of like disappearing right after the announcement of the prayer, right? So it's like now it's kind of like night almost. So go ahead, Hunter.
So I just wanted to raise kind of like perhaps like naive critique of Kant. Like that, how can you enumerate features of transcendental apperception without treating it like a subject that has predicates? You know, that sort of at the end of the day, you can be as sophisticated as you want, but you're basically treating it in subject predicate form. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Okay, yeah. Well, that's a very good question. So Kant. Go on.
Yeah, and also how knowledge of it is possible if it's not an object. So is it something? Because it's not. It doesn't seem like he's talking about, you know, what in like the 20th century you would call phenomenology either. How does apperception access itself and produce knowledge about itself?
Okay, very good question. So obviously Kant's critical operation unfolds via transcendental reflection. So in other words, what he's doing is he's identifying conditions of possibility for experience. And the identification of conditions of possibility proceeds by cataloging these different, it proceeds to a kind of a functional decomposition of cognition. So he's trying to identify, he thinks that, so he takes, I mean, Kant thinks that, in a way, it's a cliche to say this, but I think it's not true that Kant is simply trying to kind of respond to kind of Humean skepticism directly. Kant thinks that knowledge in the form of Euclidean geometry and Newtonian physics is a kind of is given. So he thinks that there's a kind of a factum of pure reason, which is this, you know, mathematics and mathematized physics. So then he's saying that given that this knowledge is, well, he thinks that given that, he thinks that any critique, any skeptical questions about the the veracity of this knowledge will beg more questions than assuming the veracity of this of this knowledge does. So he thinks that he can identify these conditions of possibility. And what does that mean? It means identifying, the kind of the two forms of intuition, space and time as form of intuitions, and the kind of the 12, the pure concepts, the categories of the understanding. And then he shows how they all work together. And then he also distinguishes between sensibility, understanding, and reason. And he shows how all these things work together in order for us to have the kind of knowledge exemplified by geometry and physics. Now, if a skeptic says to Kant, I don't believe that geometry and physics count as knowledge, Kant can then say, and will respond to this kind of skeptic by saying, well, look, what do you mean by knowledge? What is the yardstick? Because a skeptic is obliged to justify his doubt. If you doubt something, you must be able to justify your doubts. And in fact, you can only doubt something if you're certain about something else. And of course, as Kant sees it, the weakness of the skeptical position is that the skeptical has to help him or herself to a set of data, a set of givens, which they claim are somehow immune to skeptical doubt, which would be the data of sensation or consciousness prior to judgment. And of course, his whole claim is that there is no, he thinks that this kind of human skepticism is predicated on an epistemic atomism, the claim that you can decompose experience into primary units of sensation. And Kant thinks that this atomism, this epistemic atomism, is an abstraction from what is in fact a kind of an integrated experience. And he thinks that it's rooted in disavowed metaphysical prejudices. So Kant's response, Kant's kind of rejoinder to skepticism will be to say, look, if you doubt what I've accepted as paradigmatic instances of empirical knowledge, you must be able to point to an instance of empirical knowledge which you think is somehow indubitable. And what would that be? That would be something like some kind of sensation, some register of sensation or some stratum of awareness which is somehow uncontaminated by judgment. And Kant will simply say there is no such stratum, because his whole claim is that in order for you to experience yourself as having any sensation, a sensation of this such, whether it's this red facing surface or whatever, he thinks that judgment's already operative there. So he thinks that, but that's only half of the answer to the question. Okay, I haven't the other. So that would be the Kantian rejoinder to empirical skepticism. However, transcendental skepticism would be the claim that, well, given the unknowability of things in themselves, the transcendental skeptic would say, well, look, even if what you say is true about these necessary conditions for creatures such as ourselves having these kinds of experiences and knowing these things about the world, he said, well, there's no guarantee that the forms of intuition and the categories have the kind of universal, the generic or universal import that Kant claims for them. And this is, in a way, I think that Hegel is responding to transcendental skepticism. So I think Hegel takes Kant to have refuted the empirical skeptic, but Hegel is responding to transcendental skepticism, where the transcendental skepticism will say, look, first of all, your catalog, the way in which you've deduced the categories and the way in which you've identified the forms of intuition is rhapsodic. It's completely kind of arbitrary and gratuitous. It's not kind of methodologically kind of rigorous. And so I think, I mean, was that the kind of the worry that you were, you know, kind of you were identifying?
Yeah. I think there's probably a lot more to be said on it, but we can go on to the next question too.
Okay, thanks.
Kevin, do you want
Is
to
there,
ask a question or something, or should we move on?
Yeah, if we have time, I'd like to ask a question, but if we don't, that's fine.
No, go ahead. Absolutely.
Okay.
no,
Okay, so it's kind of similar to Hunter's question, actually, and you touched on it here and there while answering it. And I'm sure it's been talked about a lot in academia, but there seems to be, like, in my head so far, it's just a vague association, but there seems to be an obvious connection or similarity between, you know, this transcendental schema and the early Wittgenstein in the Tractatus. And specifically, I want to ask if you think there's some kind of fruitful contrast between the function of negative judgments, the synthetic a priori, and Wittgenstein's answer that it's kind of unsayable or nonsensical to express the pure structure of reason, of language, the world, whatever.
so are you asking? So are you asking if Hegel is challenging Wittgenstein's, you know, quietism about the ineffable, or are you saying, are you asking whether the transcendental a priori is ineffable, just as a logical structure of the world is ineffable for the early Wittgenstein?
Yeah, I guess I'm looking for the comparison more between Hegel and Wittgenstein, in the sense that, you know, like, since it doesn't have any sensible content in itself, that I think, you know, how can is there some kind of fruitful comparison with Wittgenstein, who, you know, said it's nonsense because there's no sense content?
Well, that Hegel will insist, I mean, that it's possible to, you know, he says, he thinks that there's nothing that's, you know, inexpressible or unsayable, and he thinks that there is no, I mean, he thinks that in a way the mistake is to think that you can simply work by a kind of transcendental ascent from condition to condition. And he thinks that if you do this, you will run aground in the way in which Fichte ran aground, with the I as kind of this kind of self-positing, this pure self-relation, which strives to kind of achieve a kind of a unity with a not I, but this striving is an infinite striving, a pure ought which can never be actualized. I think what Hegel is going to say is that he thinks that if something is ineffable or unsayable, it's simply because it is it's being approached in a one-sided way. It's being abstracted from the context in which it is intelligible. And I think he thinks that philosophy is precisely, the duty of philosophy is precisely to, you know, to F the ineffable, to kind of say the unsayable. But he thinks that there's no mysticism required for this, because this is precisely the responsibility of the speculative proposition. This is what he thinks speculative thinking can achieve. And this is why his critiques of both appeals to intellectual intuition, to kind of to attain the absolute, the idea that you can only experience the absolute, but this experience will remain necessarily incommunicable, and that there's a, you know, and Wittgenstein about when he thinks that, you know, value, what is most kind of important, what is questions of ethics and aesthetics are precisely inexpressible. He thinks that this kind of resort to mysticism is in a way the obverse of the primacy on argumentation, on the idea that discursive argumentation and a kind of a mere perpetual indulgence in the game of giving and asking for reasons will somehow kind of get us to the truth. Will overcome every obstacle. So I think he has a critique of both. He's got a critique of those who preemptively delimit the powers of discursive rationality, but also a critique of those who reduce the resources of discursive rationality to kind of the syllogistic reasoning in a kind of a post-Aristotelian sense, or so to those who remain at the level of synthetic judgment, but don't yet proceed to what he calls speculative judgment, where the subject and the predicates can change places. So I think, there's a hell of a lot to say about Wittgenstein and Hegel. That's about all I can manage for now. But it's a very rich, yes, you could say lots and lots of things, but I suspect that Hegel would view Wittgenstein as too Kantian, because it's also about finitude. It's about he's reasserting the disjunction between the finite and the infinite, to actualize the infinite and bring the infinite down to earth, famously.
So should we continue on with the notes? How would you like to proceed, Ray?
Well, yes, let's see if we should make some headway into the preface then of the phenomenology. So I don't think we're going to get through all of it, because maybe I put too many quotes on this, but so this is just basically, so I think that once we understand this kind of, this preliminary, I think, was necessary in order to avoid simply reading Hegel as a kind of, as a metaphysician in a bad sense, and to get some sense in which he is radicalizing Kant as opposed to simply rejecting him, and how he, some of the terms he uses, such as I, subject, science, and actuality, must be understood in this post-Kantian register, or this radicalized extension of Kantianism. It's not to say that Hegel remains Kantian. He goes beyond Kant, but we have to, but only by, acknowledging the significance of Kant's achievement. So, so I've divided up this.
If there's any number of the quote you want me to go to, just let me know and I scroll up to that, so we have that on the screen.
Well, look, let's begin with number 5, okay? Which is the first, section, paragraph 13 from the preface. Only what is completely determined is at once exoteric, comprehensible, and capable of being learned and appropriated by all. The intelligible form of science is the way open and equally accessible to everyone. And consciousness, as it approaches science, justly demands that it be able to attain to rational knowledge by way of the ordinary understanding. For the understanding is thought, the pure I as such. And what is intelligible is what is already familiar and common to science and the unscientific consciousness alike, through its having afforded direct access to the former. Now, I think this is, so the phenomenology is an attempt to develop what Hegel calls a science of the experience of consciousness. And the science, the word he uses is Wissenschaft. Means in the philosophical and intellectual context in which Hegel was writing, science is not necessarily empirical. So the Wissenschaft, appeals to kind of formal science, empirical science, natural science, human science, social science. Anything can be, wissenschaftlich. But philosophy for Hegel is, the preeminently scientific, because it has to be the kind of the rational understanding which, ultimately incorporates or better articulates all other forms of knowledge. What's interesting is that he thinks that so philosophy must be systematic, and systematicity for Hegel entails scientificity, assuming the form of a Wissenschaft. He thinks that he distinguishes here between what he calls the unscientific consciousness and science, or the scientific consciousness. And he thinks that one ascends to science from unscientific consciousness, but he thinks that there's a necessary link between the two. And I think the mediator is the understanding, because the understanding Verstand is obviously, he describes it, the understanding is thought the pure I as such. So the understanding, here he's using the term understanding in a Kantian register, where the understanding is the faculty of judgment, of objective determination. And although science...
I don't know if you want to repeat the last sentence you said, because there was some interruption, but just the last sentence.
Okay. Yes, what connects the unscientific consciousness or the pre-scientific consciousness and scientific consciousness for Hegel is the understanding. And he's using, the understanding is, Kant's understanding, the faculty of judgment, the faculty of objective determination, which he makes explicit here by calling it, the understanding is thought the pure I as such. So the agent underwriting the activities, the operations of the understanding is pure apperception. And in a way, it's the kind of, it's the mediator between ordinary pre-scientific consciousness and science. Now, science is tied to reason. And I think that he thinks, so Hegel here is saying that one can ascend to, one can satisfy the demands of reason through the mediation of the understanding. This is why he says the intelligible form of science has an intelligible form, which is open and equally accessible to everyone. This is a remarkable claim. He's saying that what he's doing in the phenomenology, which is a science of the experience of consciousness, which will prepare the way for the science of logic. He thinks it's open and accessible to everyone. No one is debarred from ascending to this kind of this science, this scientific knowledge. But in order to do this, they have to be willing to, everyone is capable of it precisely because everyone possesses understanding, and understanding is the capacity for for sapience, for cognition. So I think this is important because, in a way, speculative knowledge, the kind of speculative knowledge that Hegel claims is achieved in his own philosophy, is, democratic. It's radically democratic, and it's something that is that doesn't exclude anyone, at least in principle. And also this is going to be a controversial claim if one, for Hegel's psychoanalytic interpreters, because there's going to be a claim about there's certain, even speculative rationality is precluded from understanding certain certain conditioning factors, according to that view. But I wanted to flag that as the opening step, as the opening kind of one of the decisive opening moves in the in Hegel's understanding of how philosophy must be prosecuted systematically and in an achieved scientific form. And this is why it's because he thinks that philosophy must, ascend to the status of a science, an actual science, that it must have a way of determining its subject matter. It can't receive its subject matter from any other discourse or discipline. It must be self-determining. It must be able to determine its own subject matter, and also determine the concepts and categories through which it articulates that subject matter. So, and the second quote is his famous kind of, his alleged jab at Schelling. It's not clear whether it was actually kind of targeted at Schelling or one of Schelling's acolytes. But anyway, so this is number 6 on the handout. To pit this single insight, that in the absolute everything is the same, against the full body of articulated cognition, which at least seeks and demands such fulfillment, to palm off its absolute as the night in which, as the saying goes, all cows are black, this is cognition naively reduced to vacuity. The formalism, which recent philosophy denounces and despises only to see it reappear in its midst, will not vanish from science, however much its inadequacy may be recognized and felt. Recognizing of absolute actuality has become entirely clear as to its own nature. So, two things. One, the cognizing of absolute actuality must become entirely clear as to its own nature. In other words, both what we mean by absolute actuality and how it's possible to know it are things that have yet to be determined, the things that must be clarified, and they will be, and is integral to this science that Hegel is developing.
Hey, Ray, could I ask a question real quick?
Sure, yes.
All right, so you said that philosophy or science is self-determining and doesn't reveal itself through any exterior discourses and whatnot. To me, and then what you said though with how cognition, the cognition of absolute necessity hasn't been fully determined yet. So to me, it seems like we need to arrive at the cognition of absolute necessity through further determination of the methods and investigations of knowledge in our specific contemporary situation.
Well, okay, that's another very good observation. Now, it sounds as if Hegel is doing this, but actually, this is Mladen Dolar in his work on Hegel has actually pointed out that the preface is already kind of curious and challenging, because what Hegel is doing is actually he's criticizing Kantian formalism, transcendental formalism, the claim that in order before you must be able to identify, you must be able to understand how not knowing is possible. So in other words, you need to have a method before you can actually achieve or realize your scientific ideals. And that sounds...
This is how Hegel almost responds to, like, basically how Heidegger influenced post-structuralism. Because, like, Heidegger's almost like a good Kantian and almost is Hegelian, but, like, he's not. Because it's still purely historical. It's like, well, Hegel's entirely right that, like, it's like almost he reveals Kantian transcendental formalism through, like, a very specific historic horizon. Like, it's definitely entirely necessary and absolute, but reveals itself through the particular empiric attributes and predicates.
Yes. What I was going to, the key thing is that Hegel is rejecting what he, this kind of, what he thinks is the formalistic prejudice, which says that you need to have methodological principles in place before you can proceed in an investigation. And actually he's saying, no, you have to begin. There is no, as we'll see, he rejects the idea of a principled beginning or a kind of a foundational. And he says you begin in the middle, you begin with mediation. And there is no, and what he's doing throughout the preface is both criticizing on the one hand the Kantian, who says that the absolute is going to be inaccessible because once you've identified the transcendental methodology that explains how knowing is possible, you realize that this sets kind of limits on knowledge. He's criticizing that, but he's also rejecting what he thinks is the kind of the Schellingian kind of enthusiasm, which proposes to install itself in the absolute right away and claims that it can somehow know the absolute and then proceeds, takes the absolute as something, this kind of primary datum, which will then be kind of, will somehow kind of be elaborated. And in a way, so he's saying that he's criticizing both who want a method for knowledge before you can begin to know, but also those who think they already know, who think that they're already installed in knowing, and therefore, and he thinks that once they've simply installed themselves in the absolute, there's nowhere for them to go. This kind of, the identification of the absolute will be vacuous. It will lack, they're incapable of, articulating a conceptual determination of the absolute. So it's funny, he seems to be saying, he's doing two things at once. He's criticizing kind of, a kind of Methodism, a formal Methodism, but he's also criticizing a kind of, well, you could call it kind of, matterism. People who claim to be able to immerse themselves in the, the things themselves, like the Zaki Zelps, from the beginning, as if there's a primal phenomenon which provides the precondition for all subsequent knowing. And the emphasis on mediation will be that you have to begin from a point of which, from a mediated point, which is both in between, principled formalism and a kind of, absolute, an appeal to absolute immediacy. So this is why I think he thinks that the way to truth is through error. You have to be, because the true is the whole, which means that the false is simply an aspect of the whole or a part of the whole. And because any part of the whole will be false, any beginning well, what we call falsity or error is a necessary component of the articulation of the true. And this is why he thinks that the articulation of this actuality, in order for science to be actual and for it to have of absolute actuality, it must be self-articulating, which it must be self-differentiating in a way which will be simultaneously subjective and objective. Hence, the next claim that actuality is actually the substance becoming subject, which is, Hegel's most famous kind of, encapsulation of his project. Is this? Is that okay for now as a response, or would you like to ask a follow-up?
No, I really like what you had to say about that. And it does come into like what we're asking in this class, which is like, does, you could look at the traumatic aspect of, the Slovenian school and Kome and whatnot as a working through.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's like, I also want to say that like we ought to derive like I don't know if they're empirical enough, That's basically what I'm saying, because like I think that like
I'm sorry, what is empirical enough?
I think like I think because like I think that you need to like to get really specific, like as far as like the Freudian Lacanian unconscious goes.
Mm-hmm.
I think that and as far as determination by language and whatnot, I think it's there's much more complicated like physical vectors that end up expressing themselves. And I think this is why I actually like Freud almost more than Lacan, because with his like in his 1895 project and his Beyond the Pleasure Principle, I think he really gets at it, understanding the unconscious from an energetic perspective, and then and then that also calls, I think, for a consideration of thermodynamic principles and energy principles. Perhaps like so I think I don't like I just don't like I don't think they're absolute enough, basically. But
these principles, or hello?
Sorry, like I think that that with like object A and like the structural, it's almost like they're too Kantian even, they're too like, because like actually I saw someone post a Zizek quote on my Facebook, and it talks about how the real is inaccessible.
Mm-hmm.
But like I think that the real always reveals itself in presence. I think like we can almost look at like I want to look at positive, like for example position, like quantum positioning, and if you think there's like a position is always in relative to a very particular specific locality. So particles reveal themselves in the manner of expressions to an absolute vis-a-vis a local point of positivity and presence.
Okay.
Like, do you see what I'm saying?
I'm
like this is kind of like what I kind of focus on myself, but like, do you see? You kind of see where I'm headed.
Yes, I understood the beginning. I think I understood the starting points about.
It's non-local. Like the idea, I think, is that all local positivities reveal themselves through a non-local necessity, causality.
Okay. Yes, that's. I mean, it's taken. It's not. Yes, no, that's certainly. You know, something. You know, relevant, but it's not. You know, I think we need to kind of try to reconnect it to. You know, to where we were. You know, before, and I took you to be saying at the beginning that. Basically, that you know these you know transcendental what Kant identified as transcendental determinants, which are necessary, transcendentally necessary for the for experience. They are rooted in contingencies. They are themselves kind of anchored in contingent material forces or factors. Is that what you started off by saying?
I just wanted to, Christian, I just want to like interject and say, like, as the sidebar shows, like, there's other questions, and maybe we can move on, and because, you know, it seems like it's going to become like a dialogue. Let's see.
Okay,
let's see if other people.
Okay, hopefully we'll be able to come back.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think the next point is so number 7 is actuality understood as substance becoming subject. So this is again another one of the most famous sentences from Hegel, from paragraph 17. In my view, which can be justified only by the exposition of the system itself. Again, this can be justified only by the exposition of the system itself. So in other words, this is not some kind of principle. It's in a way that he's saying that this assertion is as yet meaningless. We're not in a position to kind of to understand it. Everything turns on grasping and expressing the true, not only as substance, but equally as subject. At the same time, it is to be observed that substantiality embraces the universal, or the immediacy of knowledge itself, as well as that which is being or immediacy for knowledge. So before I read, let's just stop. So in a way, this self-relation, whose kind of manifestations we've been tracking in these quotations, he's saying this self-relation can be understood as the becoming subject of substance. And well, what does that mean? So what he's saying is that in a way, any appeal to self-evidence is going to be the substantialization of an accidental determination. So in a way, he's saying that anything, you know, the term, Hegel's whole point is that substance doesn't exist. Substance is not out there. Substance is not actual. It's precisely that which is not yet actual. So in other words, we can't simply invoke extended substance, sensible substance, or intellectual substance as a starting point or a datum for philosophical understanding. And on the contrary, the point is to philosophical understanding proceeds through the desubstantialization of any kind of immediately posited datum, whether it's a kind of a state of affairs which can be kind of either worldly or psychic. So I think this is tied to his distinction then between, he says, substantiality embraces the universal, or the immediacy of knowledge itself, as well as that which is being or immediacy for knowledge. So substantiality encompasses two types of universality. One is the immediacy of knowledge itself, immediate knowledge, when we think we have immediate knowledge of something, as well as that which is being or immediacy for knowledge, as well as the immediacy, the objective immediacy, which is available to be known. And what he's saying, I think, is that both forms of immediacy are incomplete universalities. So in other words, that they are insufficiently, they're abstract universals as opposed to concrete universals. The immediacy of knowledge itself, so any appeal to a datum, something that we think we know, a starting point, whether it's empirical or transcendental, an abstract universal. It's an immediacy, an unmediated immediacy. But also any appeal to a kind of, to a being, to some objective datum or factum will also be another kind of abstract universal. So the part of the obligation is to concretize the universal, which involves desubstantializing these, illusory immediacies. So anything that is simply kind of, which is posited as given, wherein one abstracts from the positing. So this is, this is where we begin to see Hegel's radical rejection of any appeal to not only immediacy but self-evidence or any kind of a placeholder for that which is allegedly first or prior in the order of knowledge. And then if we continue reading the quote, it continues: if the conception of God as the one substance shocked the age in which it was proclaimed, here he's referring to Spinoza, obviously, the reason for this was, on the one hand, an instinctive awareness that, in this definition, self-consciousness was only submerged and not preserved. And on the other hand, the opposite view, which clings to thought as thought, to universality as such, is the very same simplicity, is undifferentiated, unmoved substantiality. So, again, I'll stop. He says the problem with a kind of Spinozism, a kind of Spinozistic monism, which affirms a kind of the primacy of substance and of thought or subjectivity as simply a kind of a, an aspect or an attribute of substance, is that it doesn't acknowledge, it submerges what he calls the spontaneity of apperception, of self-conscious apperception. Self-consciousness here means apperception once again. So he's saying that this kind of an appeal to the immediate, to append thought or subjectivity to substance as an attribute is to, in a way, deny Kant's discovery of spontaneity, of transcendental spontaneity, which is this kind of self-relation, this fundamental self-relation. So this would be an excess on the side of substantial objectivism, but there's an equal and contrary error, which could be called substantial subjectivism, which is the opposite view, which clings to thought as thought, to universality as such. And here he claims that anything that begins by simply by taking kind of the thought's own self-relation as the starting point, as Fichte did, I think he has Fichte in mind here, ends up substantializing thought, resubstantializing thought. Because I think that Hegel's critique of Fichte is that because Fichte, he never gets beyond this abstract self-relation between the I and the not I, and the self-positing of thought, this kind of unconditional kind of immediacy of self-positing thought, then he inadvertently resubstantializes. He's resubstantialized thinking, and he's frozen the self-relation, and he's frozen because I think for Hegel, he hasn't yet discovered the power of the negative. He hasn't understood that at the core of self-relation is negativity. And negativity is the differentiating force for Hegel. It's negativity. It's the fact that thoughts, the I, this apperceptive self-relation is a negative self-relation that is the key to its transformation, to its kind of and self-determination. A self-determination which is simultaneously subjective and objective. So finally, the third option he rules out, okay? And I think if the first option he ruled out was Spinoza, the second one was Fichte, the final one is Schelling. If thought does unite itself with a being of substance and apprehends immediacy or intuition as thinking, the question is still whether this intellectual intuition does not again fall back into inert simplicity and does not depict actuality itself in a non-actual manner. So the recourse to intellectual intuition, which is a kind of a shortcut to the absolute, where you have a kind of you have an immediate immersion in the absolute or the unconditioned. If you simply kind of say that thinking, if you identify apperception with intellectual intuition, as he thinks Schelling and Fichte both did in their own way, you to what he calls this inert simplicity, which fails to, in a way which misprizes the absolute because it is incapable of grasping it in its actuality. So here the term actuality, so the claim is that the desubstantialization of the given or the datum is the key to the actualization of substance, or rather of their self-relation as the process which is the fundamental, the core of Hegel's entire project. Desubstantialization is necessary as the actualization of the universality of the universality of subject as well as the universality of substance. And this is the task he is setting for himself. So in a way, his claim is that Hegel, what's peculiar about Hegel is he's saying that if you start with a positive datum, you're actually starting with a kind of a negative abstraction. You have to begin with negation to arrive at a concrete determination. And this negation, and the negation of negation, is precisely actualization. Actualization is self-relating negativity as the negation of negation. So this is why he's saying that. So this is important because there's two things to be said here. Now, if you think, in a way, at this point, the key thing is that if Hegel is simply saying that the absolute is, is not yet actual, but needs to be actualized, he's simply positing as a kind of a, as a virtuality or possibility. But that would still be a kind of substantialization, an illegitimate substantialization. So Hegel can't be saying that the absolute is out there, and then externalizes itself in human subjectivity. The substance is out there, externalizes itself in human subjectivity or consciousness, okay, and then is reunited with itself at the end of some kind of process. And this is, in a way, the metaphysical reading of Hegel. This is what the metaphysical reading claims. It says that it understands the becoming substance of subject as realization, where there is a kind of a virtual starting point, as if substance has this ghostly or virtual kind of existence, prior to its, its kind of self-externalization, and then the externalization inevitably is consummated in the reunification of subject and substance. But I think so. I think this is the wrong reading, which we're rejecting. But the way to understand how we're rejecting it is that if Hegel is working with the negation of negation, it means that the negation of negation can't simply reinstate, a complete, a wholly actualized substance. Okay, this is why, and if Hegel is serious about his claims about the infinite, how the infinite can be brought down to earth, and how the actuality of the infinite can be known and cognized, then the process of self-relating negativity cannot be circumscribed by either kind of with a virtual point of inception, which would be the non-actuality, the not yetness of substance, and a final kind of a culminating point or point of terminus, which would be the definitive actuality of substance. And to understand things in this way, this is the kind of picture thinking, I think, which misunderstands Hegel's claims. So whatever this process of actualization is, it's not the actualization of a self-identical substance. Substance as some kind of plural, the standard, kind of post-structuralist kind of attacks on Hegel are that he's ultimately a thinker of sameness, of self-identity, so that the negative is only a detour, which will be kind of ultimately reintegrated into a kind of consummated positivity. And Zizek and others have kind of done a lot to kind of attack this. But I think, if one it's clear that this is this would be a kind of a really serious kind of misunderstanding, given everything he's told us about his attempt to radicalize Kant. Because basically, this would turn Hegel back into a kind of a pre-Kantian dogmatic metaphysician.
Ray,
yes.
I just wanted to say that, first of all, in the actual 2.5 hour time that the seminar has, we have about 12 or 13 minutes left. Okay. I don't mind at all if you have time and you want to go over time, but we needed a few minutes to explain to people that they are going to make like the writing assignments, and also talk about the fact that you're taking 2 weeks off because you're traveling, and how are we going to deal with that. I can explain that, but at some point you have to give me the cue to do those two things, because I already have that. But also there are a few questions on the side. If you look at them, maybe you pick the one that's the most relevant of between Mika's question, Kevin's, and Hunter's, and maybe respond to that, and then we save some time. But if you feel like going over the board because it's the first seminar, I have no problem letting this run over 2.5 hours. It's all up to you.
Well, okay. Well, I'll try to respond to the questions, the 3 questions, and then I think that will, and then then we'll stop and then make the the announcement.
Okay.
So I think so. Mika's question is about Wirklichkeit, which is the German word which can mean actual or real.
Mika, do you want to quickly describe it, but please don't get into too much detail because we don't have time. You're on. Okay, I'm not sure what's going on with Mika. Okay, Ray, just take it as is.
I'll go on to the next question then.
Yes.
This is Kevin's question. I wonder if certain conditions like severe autism provide a counterclaim to universality of the self-relating negativity, or would Hegel say that autism is a dysfunction in the ability to actualize oneself, kind of problematic in tone and connotation? Well, now, autism Okay, I mean, now I think you have to be careful here because now, I hesitate to use words like kind of, cognitive impairments or kind of, that's has to be careful about what one says about this kind of stuff. But clearly, the self-relation is not, wouldn't really kind of, an autistic subject is just as capable of this self-relation in a Hegelian sense, in so far as it takes anything to be thus and so. Okay, because any kind of cognitive apprehension of oneself and one's world is, kind of, depends upon the operations of this, this self-relation. So I think that, the universality of self-relating negativity. Now, it's not a Kantian universal, so it's not like it doesn't have the universality of a Kant kind of transcendentally priori, but it's a universality which he thinks is implicit, even in, which is concretely realized, even in cognitive, alleged cognitive dysfunction. Okay. Because in a way there would I think precisely because it doesn't invoke a norm or a standard from which you can simply deviate, or from which you can kind of, so here's the relationship between the universal and the particular is not where you can have a kind of, you don't have a kind of a universal norm or standard, which can be challenged through a kind of an exception. Okay, the points for Hegel is that every a true universal is concrete insofar as it's always concretely realized in apparent dysfunctions or malfunctions or contingencies or accidents. So it's not as if, so first of all, in a way, you wouldn't even need to characterize as a dysfunction for Hegel. He says that it would still be, he would, I think, insist that it's still an instance of this concrete universal. Because the concrete universal involves the mistakes, the alleged mistakes, or in a way kind of, I apologize for this kind of language I'm going to use, but the debilities, okay, that would affect a kind of an autistic subject are really no different in kind from the debilities that affect, any other kind of, myself, or any alleged kind of, standard or default or paradigmatically, able psychological subject. So I really think that whatever you can criticize, people have lambasted Hegel's universalism, but I actually think that if you understand what he means by universal, I think that disease, sickness, death are precisely not exceptions to the universality. This is why he talks about the labor of the negative, and the relationship between the necessary and the merely accidental is completely, the accidental becomes necessary for him. So I don't think that would be a credible counterexample. Okay, I'll go on to the next question from Hunter. I'm curious about F.H. Bradley and British absolute idealism. Would that view count as a naive reading of Hegel with a ghostly subject and substance virtually pre-existing their actualization. Also, in your view, does Hegel really say clearly whether his system unfolds in a determinate way or not? Or is the debate over that pointing to a sort of aporia in his position? Okay, well, I don't know the Bradley or McTaggart as well as I'd like to. So, but they are taken. They're usually taken to be the you know, the exemplars of the you know, the metaphysical interpretation of that, where the absolute is this kind of this actuality, this, you know, effective actuality of which everything is a part. And I'm not sure what they have to say about actualization, though. I mean, for McTaggart, time is unreal, so everything is already actual. I don't know. I'm not sure what Bradley says about this, but I suspect it's something similar. So, in this view, you'd have, you know, you've got a kind of this eternally actual absolute, okay, which is misapprehended or misperceived by finite subjects. And now, whether that is in fact, I mean, maybe there's a reading of Bradley and McTaggart, you know, that is more, you know, interesting and that could actually, you know, absolve them of this charge. I suspect that probably such a reading could be developed.
Do you think that that world of reading Hegel has relevance today? Like, do you think that there's that in contemporary readings of Hegel that's kind of just a conservatism that isn't a meaningful part of the discussion, or like I'm just about the syllabus for this course? Yeah.
Sure. It's not. I mean, you can't. I mean, look, you can't. In a way, given what Hegel says, like the misunderstanding or the alleged misunderstandings or errors about what Hegel's really up to are as, you know, as important to understand what he is really up to. So there is nothing that deserves to be discounted or dismissed. And I think that those thinkers, you know, those thinkers are actually, you know, unfairly treated. Lots of Victorian and Edwardian thinkers are really kind of, you know, have been kind of caricatured. And in fact, if one examines them, you know, they're far more subtle and interesting. And McTaggart is a really, you know, fascinating figure. So I would say that, so I say that, you know, there would have to be, that's something that would have to be worked out. You'd have to read them, figure out whether or not they really are. The problem would be Kant, not Hegel. I mean, really the question is whether or not, is not, you know, their fidelity, their problematic fidelity to Hegel. The question is Kant. And if Kant is the decisive turning point, the question is if Hegel is has successfully gone beyond Kant, the question would be, have they all managed to kind of successfully go beyond Kant, in the sense of, can they you know, defend themselves against the Kantian charge of dogmatism, of metaphysical, of rationalist dogmatism. And then the second part of your question is, does Hegel really say clearly whether his system unfolds in a determinate way or not? Or is the debate over that pointing to sort of aporia? Well, he thinks it does. The system does, through this accumulation of determinations, and it unfolds both, you know, the first in the phenomenology and then in the logic, in the science of logic. The question, I think, the key question is, I think for Hegel, that this unfolding can only has a kind of retroactive structure, so that this, you discover, determination is retroactive because you discover what something already was. So in a way, the unfolding, see, I think the thing for Hegel is that the unfolding, it's not linear, it's not moving forward from start to finish. The unfolding is actually moving backwards and forward at the same time. It's the is as you accumulate negativity, which is the accumulation of determination, that kind of accumulation is retroactive, because it's, you know, the kind of it's what always already was. Essence is what, you know, always already was, and therefore you discover what has been. This is why philosophy is retrospective. This is why the Isle of Minerva flies at dusk. Philosophy cannot be prospective, and speculation for Hegel isn't future-oriented at all. It's actually about understanding how what is came to be, and how once you've understood how what is came to be, that changes your relationship to. This is the other thing we'll, I think, talk about more later. But
should we move on to Mika's question, who was kind of not ready in the moment? Mika, go ahead. Just unmute yourself, and you're on. Okay, your mic has stopped working. So if you want to type it, or just type your question, and then we'll go from there. The question is simple. What determines the transition of that term, Wirklichkeit, context, grammar, or is it a play on words by Hegel?
It's not a play on word by Hegel. In the German Wirklichkeit, I mean, I'm not a fluent German speaker, but it means actuality, but also, so actually it means actuality or effectivity. It's translated, Hegel's early translators translated it as reality. So the famous claim, the real is rational and the rational is real. In that phrase from the philosophy of right, the word that Hegel uses is Wirklichkeit. What he's saying is that the rational is actual and the actual is rational. But what I think the way to understand what he means by actual is effectivity. But can it be truth? Or does Hegel never use it for truth? No, he thinks that the true is the whole, and the whole can only be, is necessarily actual. So there is an intrinsic link between truth and actuality, or Wirklichkeit. Wahrheit and Wirklichkeit, those are the two German words. So they're intimately connected, and Hegel's saying that what is true is what is effective is a better word than actual, because effective doesn't have these so many Aristotelian resonances with kind of potentiality.
But actual also has that relation to act, which then connects it to what you just suggested.
Yes, yes. What is now effective or operational.
So if the questions are done, let's just get
one more, I think.
One quick one from me as well.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
It's more of a procedural one, actually, because I wanted to know, I guess, both Ray and everyone else, to what degree people were interested in this kind of translation questions and comparing the original German. I have what looks to me like a good side-by-side of the phenomenology in English and German that I'm going to use as a reference. I don't know if anyone else here speaks German and if that's useful for them to bring up questions like that or not. But I can screen share it and use it as a reference if other people think that'll be a good use of our time.
Go ahead.
Sure. Sure. Yes. Yes, I think that would be excellent.
You mean you want to do it now, or you want to say during the?
No, I mean during the course of the class over the
that would
next
be great, and
weeks.
I would share your screen when you have them on. But remember, you can only share one screen, so somehow you have to put them together in another application together, or
oh no, it's a side-by-side translation.
Oh,
they're on the same page. Yeah,
no
they're right next to each other, so it's a good reference.
That's great.
Is this the Pinkard translation of the phenomenology?
Yes, the author is Terry Pinkard.
Yeah, Terry Pinkard. Yes, that's a very good. It hasn't been published yet, although it's been around for 6 years.
Yeah.
I think it's going to come out with Cambridge, who published the new translations of the Science of Logic. But it's an excellent translation, and it's very helpful because it has a German.
You can also share the whole document on the classroom if you want, but it's up to you if you want to do that or not.
Yeah, I'll put it up there.
Okay, so back to some real actual procedural stuff here. The first thing is, I have a question, Ray. So by next week, you want us to read both readings for the first week and the second week, because some people like did not get the readings like early enough to come to the class for the so basically read the 1 and 2, right? And basically then the writing request is basically what me and Ray discussed in terms of assignments, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ray, this is what I understood from what we discussed yesterday, is that you would write 4 short pieces of like 1 or maximum 2 pages on these 8 readings. So basically you got 2 readings now, first one and the second one. By next week you produce a 500-word document that is like your reflections on the lecture and on the readings, and basically have it up and available prior to the class so it can be used and commented on in the classroom. And then somehow these 4 pieces of writing, somehow we'll try to synthesize them or integrate them into some one text or several texts or something by the time the class rolls. That's sort of like the sort of like assignments for the seminar. So
okay, yes, that's fine.
Yeah. So basically that is basic, and I really encourage you to really take it seriously and do it, because this is an amazing opportunity to sort of like interact with Ray. And I would put them together, create a document that then Ray can easily access as one document rather than like several bits and parts and going between. I would like post them with everyone's names, and it would be one Google Doc shared by everyone for later reflections and editing and all that. And hopefully we can end up with something really awesome out of the class and hopefully publish it somewhere. So that's sort of like the idea, but I'm not going to get ahead of myself. Just like for next week, make sure you have that 500-word written. So that's that part. The other part is that Ray is away for 2 sessions of the class. One of them is going to be on November 8th. The other one is November 20th, right? Am I right, Ray? Yeah.
Yes.
What we decided to do is that we're going to, in these 2 weeks, there will be no classes on November the 8th and November 20th.
It's November 6th.
November 6th.
November 6th, November 20.
And November 20. I'm sorry, I apologize. And what's going to happen is we're not going to extend the class 2 weeks, because then it's going to get deep into December, and Ray's classes in American University of Beirut is already done. So basically 1 extra class will get added on December 4th. And then between the last planned class and December 4th, we will have a substitute session, which we'll decide later through email what day and time will work for everyone. So basically in the last 2 weeks, we will end up with 3 sessions closer to December 4th. So, but we can decide that one. But as far as we know, there will be no class on November 6th, and then no class on November 20th, an extra class on December 4th, and another extra class prior to December 4th. Between November 26th and December 4th, there will be another class, basically. And we decide upon it later. So this is basically what we decided and all that. So I hope that, and I'm going to like put that in an email and send it to everyone, including those who could not make it to the class, so they can also receive it. So yeah, so we already are actually 10 minutes over time. Ray, do you have any final remarks or any kind of like clue you want to give to people in the way they approach the writing? If you have few words, then we can maybe end. Any kind of advice, any kind of like.
I would say, yes, resist the temptation. Above all, resist the temptation to write like Hegel and to simply, use his terminology. Contrary to, everything he says about, the speculative proposition, etc. So I think because, in a way, the challenge is because the ideas are really, deep and difficult, I think it's more helpful to try to be as clear, to achieve the maximum degree of clarity and precision by focusing on something very, very limited. yes, that's what I would say. And Pepin, I think, is a good exemplar. I mean, his book is not easy, but he translates Hegel into, and Hegel's very deepest insights into a kind of into a tractable English idiom. So the only thing is, I would try to kind of to limit yourself in a way, but also that way you'll get deeper into things. If you focus more on a single thing or a single issue, you'll get more out of it, because you'll end up with something which is crisper, and it will be more. You'll get I'll get more out of it, and so will you.
Okay, everyone, that was really lovely, and I'm going to end the broadcast. So thank you so much, Ray, for your incredible lecture and discussion, and see you everyone next week.
Okay, thank you.